Hello and welcome. I am Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel deeply regrets the tragic mishap after a strike on Nasser Hospital in Gaza killed 20 people, including 5 journalists. Among the dead were contributors for Reuters, the Associated Press and Al Jazeera, with Netanyahu insisting Israel values the work of journalists and medical staff. UK Foreign Minister David Lammy said he was horrified. Germany called the attack shocking and France's Emmanuel Macron declared it intolerable, urging Israel to respect international law. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan also slammed Prime Minister Netanyahu's government, accusing it of relentlessly destroying everything that belongs to humanity. President Donald Trump hosted South Korean President Lee Jae-myung hours after a Truth Social post warning of a purge or resolution in Seoul. Lee diffused the tension with flattery, even joking about a Trump Tower in North Korea, but the meeting produced few breakthroughs on trade or defense. President Donald Trump told reporters he hopes to meet North Korean leader Kim Jong-un this year, even as he hosted South Korean leader for the first time in the White House. Trump said he remains open to further trade talks with Seoul while renewing criticisms of America's ally. Meanwhile, North Korea says ongoing joint US-South Korean show Washington aims to occupy the peninsula, warning such exercises target countries across the region. A top general told state media that if drills continue, Seoul and Washington will face an unpleasant situation and pay a dear price. President Trump has announced the immediate removal of Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook, accusing her of making false statements on mortgage agreements. The sacking, announced on Truth Social, marks the first time a president has ousted an FED board member in the bank's 111-year history, as Trump escalates pressure on the central bank over interest rates. Kilmar Albrado Garcia, whose wrongful deportation to El Salvador made him a symbol of President Trump's immigration crackdown, has been detained again in Baltimore. The 30-year-old now faces a possible second removal, this time to Uganda, a country where he has no ties, after being freed on bond last week on migrant transport charges. A powerful typhoon has killed at least 3 people in Vietnam, wrecked nearly 7,000 homes, flooded Hanoi streets and downed 331 power poles, state media officials have said. Kajiki also inundated thousands of hectares of crops, triggering flash flood warnings across northern Vietnam. We start this hour in West Asia, where Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has expressed regret over an airstrike that killed 20 people, including 5 journalists at Nasser Hospital in Gaza. He called it a tragic mishap and said Israel values journalists and civilians. The Israeli army confirmed the strike and announced an immediate inquiry, insisting it does not target reporters. This is the first time the IDF has recognized them as journalists and not members of Hamas. Here is what Efe Defrin, the Israeli army spokesperson, had to say on the issue.
Chief of the General Staff has instructed that an inquiry be conducted immediately to understand the circumstances of what happened and how it happened. Reporting from an active war zone carries immense risk, especially in a war with a terrorist organization such as Hamas, who cynically hides behind the civilian population. As always, we will present our findings as transparently as possible.
Among the dead were journalists from Reuters, the Associated Press and Al Jazeera. Witnesses say a second strike hit as Reuters rushed to help. The UN Secretary General strongly condemned the attack, repeating calls for a ceasefire. humanitarian access and the release of hostages in Gaza. Listen in to what a UN spokesperson, Stefan Dujarric, has to say.
The Secretary General strongly condemns the killings of Palestinians today in Israeli strikes that hit Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis in the Gaza Strip. Those killed, in addition to civilians, included medical personnel and journalists. We want to extend our condolences to families and colleagues of those journalists killed, especially those representative of the Associated Press, Reuters, and Al Jazeera who are in this room or online. These latest horrific killings highlight the extreme risks that medical personnel and journalists face as they carry out their vital work amidst this brutal conflict.
Well, of course, these strikes happen while Israel presses on its offensive into Gaza City. A highly controversial plan condemned both within Israel and from its allies around the world. This marks a rare occasion when Israel has actually said it regrets its actions in this strike, which has now killed 20 people, 5 of which have been confirmed as journalists working for the likes of Al Jazeera, the Associated Press, and Reuters. World reactions have started to come in, that of France, the United Kingdom, and Turkey, all of which have condemned the strikes. As we said, this occurred yesterday, where Israel struck the Nasser Hospital in Gaza City in the south of the Gaza Strip, killing at least 20 people, including 5 journalists. They included cameraman Hassan al-Masri, a Reuters contractor who was killed near a live broadcasting position operated by Reuters on an upper floor of the roof just below the hospital in Khan Yunis. Israel has acknowledged the strikes and has ordered an inquiry into them. The world is reacting and reeling from such a horrific attack. Other people that were involved in the attack and were killed include Mariam Abu Daga, who freelanced for the Associated Press and other outlets, and also Mohammed Salama. She worked for Qatar-based broadcaster Al Jazeera. Abu Taha also died in the attack, who was a freelance journalist who worked with other organizations, occasionally contributing to Reuters, and also another journalist called Ahmed Abu Aziz. Okay, we're now joined by Dr. Wael Awad. He is a Middle East affairs expert, and he joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Awad. We saw this horrific attack occur yesterday. However, a full Israeli response, we have just got that this morning, especially from the Prime Minister's office. Benjamin Netanyahu has called the strike on the hospital a tragic mishap. How significant is this admission of regret, and does it change the perception of Israel's accountability in this conflict?
Well, I think this is an eye wash to the distance themselves from the intentional and deliberate killing of the journalists. It's not the first time that the journalists have fallen to the guns of the Israeli military occupational army. They have been killed, more than 246 journalists over the 22 months of this ongoing war on Gaza strips. And so therefore there is nothing new to this deliberate killing. And this is a shame on the international community, and even us as a journalist, we are not even willing to condemn such kind of an act of aggressions and deliberate killing on the air. We were watching the horrific crime that has been committed. And I don't think an army of such a sophisticated army with all the weaponry and nobody to shoot down all these airplanes and the drones, which have a total, complete surveillance of every movement of every beings moving in the ground, including a small snakes or a small cats or anything they can watch, that they are unable to recognize on the air that this is a journalist area, including the camps, which is last week we also lost a couple of our colleagues in Gaza and deliberate attack on their own camp of a journalistic, they have put a tent and they were under the tent. We all know such kind of a criminal act should be condemned, should be fully investigated independently, and Israel should give access to the foreign correspondent to enter into the states, the Gaza Strip, so they can reveal all the facts on the ground, not only by taking what the army of Israel says.
Dr. Awad, for the first time, the IDF publicly recognized the dead as journalists rather than Hamas affiliates. How important is this shift in narrative, and could it impact future military conduct?
I don't think the military conduct will stop because, see, the main objective of Israel is not to allow any journalist functioning in Gaza. That's why they're not even opening any access to any foreign correspondent or any correspondent to enter into the Gaza Strip, because the main objective is not only to annihilate, to totally destroy any kind of livelihood in Gaza, but even to expel them. So therefore, if there is somebody on the ground and witnessing and reporting those crimes that carried every day, I don't see any future of any changing of the Israelis' intention of continuous bombardment and the genocide, not only by the bombardment, that continuous bombardment, but also by the starvation that they have been committed. And you look at the United Nations, UN security, UN agencies and Human Rights Watch, everybody is condemning, everybody is watching the genocide, and nobody is taking a full action, because Israel is the cuddle boy of the United States, where nobody can take, even at the Security Council meeting, any actions or condemnation against Israel.
Okay, Dr. Awad, do stay with us. We will, of course, bring you all further updates from the Middle East defining conflict, which is the Gaza crisis, as we go forward. We now move over to Australia, where Prime Minister Anthony Albanese announced the expulsion of Iran's ambassador, accusing Tehran of directing anti-Semitic attacks in Sydney and Melbourne. Albanese said the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation had gathered credible evidence linking Iran to the attacks on a Sydney restaurant and a Melbourne mosque. The Prime Minister warned that the incidents come amid a sharp rise in anti-Semitic acts in Australia since the Israel-Hamas war began in October of 2023. Here's what the Australian Prime Minister stated.
Since the terrible events of October 7, 2023, we have witnessed a number of appalling anti-Semitic attacks against Australia's Jewish community. I've made it clear that these sorts of incidents have no place in Australia, and that I wanted ASIO and the AFP to investigate as a priority. ASIO has now gathered enough credible intelligence to reach a deeply disturbing conclusion that the Iranian government directed at least 2 of these attacks.
We're once again joined by Dr. Awad to give us some more insight into this. Dr. Awad, how significant is Australia's decision to expel Iran's ambassador, and what precedent does that set in diplomatic relations here?
Well, as I said, it's the first time of their history they have been expelling a diplomat and an ambassador. That's also even before the full investigation have taken place and direct involvement of Iranian, if there is any. And that's a clear indication the influence of the Israelis' lobby in Australia and many countries have reached a stage where any action or any condemnation of Israel actions in the Palestinian Territory, West Bank, or in Gaza Strip have been seen as an anti-Semite. Even if you demonstrate or you criticize Mr. Netanyahu, you will be an anti-Semite. So therefore, the Australian government has to take the full responsibility of the total investigation. This is an offshore organization who carried out a year ago the attack on Israelis' interests in Australia, and therefore there is no direct link even to the Iranian. But having said that, I leave it to the investigators of the authorities in Australia to find out who is behind this attack, not only to jump the conclusion because of it is the lobby of the Israelis are quite interested in making sure that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard is also being considered or targeted as a terrorist organization, has been Israel objective of involving them or conducting them or indicting them all over the world.
Dr. Awad, obviously we've just heard the Australian Prime Minister's statements there. What does this say about Iran's broader pattern of operations abroad? Is this consistent with how Tehran has acted in Europe or the United States?
I think this is the most ridiculous accusation against Iran by any country. Iran is a responsible state, and they know their action. When Iran has been attacked, you know, they will go directly and attack their country. They don't care about what other people say, and they will take their retaliation. This has happened against the United States when they attacked the Iranian and killed their officials publicly and declaring that they have killed them. Qasimi and all these people are the Iraqi Abu Muhammad when they killed them inside Iraq. And that's a clear indication Iran went all the way and attacked American base. Similarly, when Israel attacked Iranian territories and the American attacked Iranian territories, they went directly and attacked. Why they should go to far countries and attack Israeli officials or Israeli synagogue or any Israeli officials when they can do it directly next door to us? So I don't see any linking between the two. It's just simply a diplomatic onslaught by Israel against Iran.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wael Arad, for joining us here on NewsX World. Pleasure to have you, and thank you for taking the time. We now move over to Europe next, where Donald Trump confirmed that he had spoken again with Russian leader Vladimir Putin since last week's talks at the White House with Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky and European leaders. Trump called every conversation good until a bomb drops on Kyiv, but insisted a deal to end the war is near. He warned of very big consequences if Putin and Zelensky don't meet soon, adding he may intervene strongly within weeks. Let's listen in to what the US president had to say.
You've spoken to Putin since last Monday.
Yeah, I have.
What is your conversation? Or can you share?
Every conversation I have with him is a good conversation, and then unfortunately a bomb is loaded up into Kiev or someplace, and then I get very angry about it. I think we're going to get the war done. It's tough. I thought that would be, of the 7 that I settled, I thought that would be the easiest of the group. See, you never know what's going to happen. You know, war, strange things happen in war. The fact that he went to Alaska, our country, I think was a big statement that he wants to get it done. That was not easy for him to go to Alaska, you know, for him to come here. Well, that's going to be up to them. It takes 2 to tango, I always say it. And they should meet, I think, before I have a meeting and probably close the deal. But I think it's appropriate they meet. They do not exactly get along well, as you can understand. And I'm sure it's a meeting that perhaps he didn't like, but he wasn't happy about coming to the United States either. That was a big concession, and I appreciate the fact that he did. You know, I've always had a very good relationship, despite a fake Russia haunt that we had. But we've always had a great relationship, very good relationship, strong relationship with Russia. That's a good thing, not a bad thing, by the way. I thought this would be, in many ways, the easiest way. I have a very good relationship with Putin. I thought it would be the easiest one to stop, and it's really not. It's very complex. It's very personal from their standpoint. There's tremendous dislike personally between the two men, and we're going to have to straighten that out. But I would like to see them meet first. They'd like me to be there. I may be there. I may not. I'll see. But I wanted them to work out their differences first, because it is ultimately between them. And when that happens, I think we'll get it in.
Meanwhile, Secretary of State Marco Rubio held follow-up calls with European counterparts, who pledged to push for a negotiated settlement. Italy's Antonio Tajani called for NATO-style guarantees for Ukraine and offered Deming support, while Germany's Lars Kleinbell emphasized Berlin's commitment but stressed that talks must start with a ceasefire and be led by Kyiv. Polish President Karol Nawrocki blocked wider child benefits for Ukrainian refugees, saying only those working in Poland should qualify. Let's listen in to what the Polish President Karol Nawrocki has said.
Swojego zdania nie zmieniam i zamierzam wykonywać swoje zobowiązania i uznaję, że 800+ powinno przynależeć tylko tym Ukraińcom, którzy podejmują się wysiłku pracy w Polsce. Podobnie z ochroną zdrowia, to stawia nas w sytuacji, w której obywatele państwa polskiego we własnym państwie, w Polsce, są traktowani gorzej niż nasi goście z Ukrainy.
We're now joined by Professor Veselin Popovsky. He is a professor and vice dean at Jindal Global Law School, and he joins us live from New Delhi. Professor Popovsky, pleasure as always. President Trump says a deal to end the war is near and has hinted he may intervene strongly within weeks. What do you think that means, and how do you think a possible meeting with Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky is shaping up to be?
Well, it's very difficult to say what Donald Trump means. I think he doesn't know what he means. He talks always the same, and it's a deja vu, and no action follows. He put many ultimatums, and those ultimatums expires, and he put new ultimatums, and basically he say, if something doesn't happen tomorrow, I will give another 2 weeks, and when the 2 weeks expire, he give another 2 weeks. So it's an impossible question to answer, Thomas, but generally, at some point, the expectation is that Donald Trump will realize that without putting very strong sanctions on Putin, on Russia, it will not work. By pleasing Russians, by trying to be nice to them, he achieved nothing for the last 7.5 months already. So it's high time for him to realize. In some of the speeches, he realizes that. He mentions that until the next bomb falls on Kiev or elsewhere, everything falls apart. So for that bomb not to fall to Kiev, he needs to do what every other country in the world, Europeans, Australians, and Japanese, South Koreans, Canadians doing, NATO, the European Union, to put strong sanctions on Russia and to offer full support, including military, to Ukraine. And he can play that. He can say Joe Biden didn't do enough. He did very little for Ukraine. And he didn't stop Vladimir Putin, and I'm going to impose harsh sanctions on Putin, which John Biden didn't do that. So he has the way to play this to his domestic audience as well. So again, until he does this, it doesn't matter what he says, it matters what he does. And when Donald Trump starts doing what is necessary to be done, sanctions on Russia, cut the negotiations, no more need to talk to aggressors and war criminals like everybody in that government in Moscow, and start full support for Ukraine. Offer, and again, they were mentioning the assistance to NATO security guarantees, including with Air Force, United States Air Force. That sounds quite promising. If US does this, if they offer air support, if they offer more munitions and weapons, if they offer more intelligence, they might be also at some point progress also in the negotiation. 30-day ceasefire, again, a very good idea. A long time ago, Donald Trump proposed that back in February. He shouldn't drop that. He should tell Putin, if you don't stop the fire, I'm not talking about anything else with you.
But Professor Popovsky, I'm just very wary of time here. However, we've seen a huge diplomatic push here from the United States within the past couple of weeks with that big meeting in Alaska, and then of course that Zelensky, along with the European counterparts, meet in Washington. Now everything is starting to simmer down. Can you have a look at that big push and tell me if anything has come out of it?
Yes, there is a push, Thomas, but it was the wrong method, not the right. It is the correct approach, but the wrong method. Again, without sanctions on Russia, without strong pressure on Russia, any talk will be meaningless, like those last week were, again. It's important to talk, but it's also important to act. And with basically not delivering the promises, Donald Trump put an ultimatum 2 weeks and said, if Russia doesn't negotiate, I will impose severe sanctions. And when that deadline came on 8th of August, instead of putting sanctions, he agreed to invite Putin to Alaska. And that's the wrong thing to do, obviously, because that makes Putin even more arrogant, even more aggressive, and he will never, ever stop fire if Putin behaves like that. That's something Donald Trump does not realize. He needs to put Putin in the corner. In the next phone call, he should tell him simply,
Yes.
call your general, stop the fire, otherwise I stop talking to you and I impose severe sanctions on you. That's the language Putin will understand.
Yes, Professor Veselin Popovsky, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. Pleasure to have you as always. We now move over to the Indo-Pacific, where in a meeting with South Korean President Lee Jae-myung, US President Donald Trump said he wants the United States to take ownership of the land where US bases are located in South Korea. At the same time, he stressed on South Korea paying more to host some 28,500 American troops. Earlier, President Trump accused South Korea of being a money machine that takes advantage of American military protection. Meanwhile, South Korean President Lee Jae-myung stated that he and US President Trump discussed modernizing the two countries' alliance during their summit talks. He also said that he is working on trilateral alliances with Japan, the United States, in the region. Let's listen in to what both leaders had to say.
But we have a very good relationship militarily. They would say, but we gave you land. I said, no, you didn't. You lease us land. There's a big difference between giving and leasing. And maybe one of the things I'd like to do is ask them to give us ownership of the land where we have the big fort. You know, we spent a lot of money building a fort, and there was a contribution made by South Korea, but I would like to see if we could get rid of the lease and get ownership of the land where we have a massive military base.
오늘 트럼프 대통령과의 정상회담에서 한미 동맹을 안보 환경 변화에 발맞추어 더 호혜적이고 미래지향적으로 현대화 나가자는데 뜻을 함께 모았습니다. 미국의 대한 방위 공약과 한미 연합 방위 태세는 철통같이 유지될 것입니다. 동시에 한국은 한반도의 안보를 지키는 데 있어 보다 주도적인 역할을 앞으로 해 나갈 것입니다. 저는 이번 방미에 앞서서 마당을 같이 쓰는 이웃 일본을 먼저 방문하고 왔습니다. 트럼프 대통령께서도 일기 때부터 한미일 협력을 강조해 왔던 것을 기억합니다. 저는 트럼프 대통령과 함께 굳건한 한미 동맹을 바탕으로 한미일 협력을 긴밀히 다져 나갈 것입니다.
We're now joined by Dr. Sanjay Kumar, who's a journalist at the Korea Herald, and he joins us live from Seoul. Dr. Kumar, as always, pleasure to have you here on the program. What is the feeling in the South Korean capital now since President Lee launched his charm offensive in the Oval Office against Donald Trump? There were, of course, fears before him entering this meeting, given his Truth Social tweet. But what is your analysis of that meeting since it has come to a conclusion?
There was a panic late night, just before the summit, around 12:30 to 1 a.m. in the night. I'm talking about yesterday's night. There was a panic in the press, media, and the concerned people in Korea. And there were insecurities too that these factors may affect the negotiation process and the dialogue. Because, you know, like the Trump's style had been in news for many countries, and what happened last time during Zelensky's meeting, it was really disappointing to many of the people in Korea, and they were very afraid, like, not to repeat such kind of things or something similar. But very important thing is to note here is that people are now people have received it in a very positive way in Korea. And yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Dr. Kumar.
Yeah, so people have received the negotiations as much better than expected because many negotiations have gone in right direction, and what Koreans were expecting is going in the right direction, and it looks like nothing negative has been there. So it is very positive mood here. The feelings among the Koreans is very positive, and they are thinking that in coming years, Korea will be more stable.
Dr. Kumar, thank you very much for joining us and giving us your insight on that huge meeting between the South Korean and US counterparts. We now move on to some further updates from that meeting, where Donald Trump and his South Korean counterpart at the White House both emphasized the importance of diplomacy to address North Korea. Trump, boasting of his rapport with Kim Jong-un, expressed confidence in returning to negotiations. Lee encouraged Trump to act as a peacemaker and mentioned the possibility of a Trump Tower in North Korea, with the idea of playing golf there. Despite their cordial exchange, little progress was made on specifics about restarting talks. Their meeting also covered trade and defense, with Trump pressing South Korea on military contributions and tariffs, but no resolutions were reached. North Korea's stance on denuclearization remains unchanged. Let's listen in to what South Korea's new president Lee Jae-myung had to say on the issue.
이미 22년보다 지금 이제 3년 사이에 핵폭탄 보유 숫자가 이제 2.5배로 늘어났다. 그리고 핵물질 생산 능력은 엄청나게 늘어났다라는 게 이제 객관적인 사실이죠. 그래서 우리 한국 입장에서는 강력한 방위력은 보유하고 끊임없이 무기 체계 장비를 개발해서 군사적으로 압도하고는 있지만, 이 재래식 무기에 있어서는 우리가 압도적으로 앞서더라도 이 소위 핵무기에서는 우리가 전혀 갖고 있지를 못하기 때문에 그야말로 엄청난 재래식 무기, 그다음 그들의 핵무기, 이게 공포의 균형을 이루고 있는 상태가 됐죠. 그리고 실제로 이제 우리 회의나 또는 이제 식사 시간의 얘기는 매우 진지하게 협력적으로 이루어졌고, 우리가 기대했던 것보다 훨씬 더 많은 것들에 대해서 대화되고 또 양해하고 또 격려를 받았기 때문에.
Well, that is all that we have time for, but we will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world. Thank you.